one of the beautiful things about Star Wars for me, Jim, and for all musicians, I think, is that people, in many cases young people who've never been to a concert, never heard an orchestra before, heard a symphony orchestra for the first time, and felt not put off by it, but attracted to it, so that you can imagine my gratification when people come decades later, younger people, and say, I got turned on to music because of movie scores.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
This is Cheapseat Reviews.
Yeah, I mean, those three defined my childhood. Last time I'm going to do this, I promise. Okay, I don't promise. But
Just don't tell them that that's a strange variation of the Emperor's theme.
hello and welcome to Cheapseat Reviews, the podcast that explores the Hollywood film industry for the greater good. This is normally where Sam would say something for the greater good, but he's not here, so I'm just going to repeat myself and just say the greater good. This is a bonus episode. We don't have very many of these, but that's right, we're doing a bonus episode. Tonight we're talking about the music of Star Wars, specifically just the original trilogy. I am Shawn Allred, and joining me tonight is Erik Woods from the Cinematic Soundtrack Podcast.
Good evening. How are you?
I said that wrong. Last time.
Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast.
Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. I even took a second before hitting record to make sure I wrote down the right thing. And
it's all right. No problem. I think you spelled my name right, which is good. So.
Yeah, Erik with a K. Yeah,
that's right.
That part we got right. Well, we're off to a good start. All right. So, Erik,
great start, huh?
Thanks for joining me again. This is
it's my pleasure. We're talking Star Wars music. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Heck yeah. I had to look back and see what we had you on before. So we had you back on about 11 weeks ago for Terminator 2.
That's right.
And
yeah, that was fun.
That was a fun episode, and I got a lot of good feedback from that episode. So
that's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I guess a lot is relative. For us, any feedback is considered a lot. But
you're right. Any feedback is good.
Yeah.
At least somebody's listening.
That's true. And there were several people that said, "I'm so glad you talked about the helicopter stunt." So
great.
Yeah.
Great. That still blows me away to this day.
Oh man, no kidding. It's incredible. Tell my listeners, because I know your listeners know all about you, but mine don't really know a lot about you, Erik. Other than you have a cool podcast called Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. There we go. See, I'm going to get it right eventually. So tell my people, kind of like my listeners, boy, you can tell that I'm not used to being off script. Just tell my listeners, who you are, where you've been, and how you kind of love what you do and Star Wars in general. I want you to give it a nice big bow on it.
It all kind of accumulates into like one singular moment, which is actually Return of the Jedi. It's the first movie I saw in the theaters, and I knew Star Wars music, but I had never heard it before. And I had never seen a Star Wars movie. I saw the Star Wars trilogy backwards. So I saw Jedi, then Empire, then Star Wars. But I can recall being in one of these massive theaters in Toronto. And I think it was a university theater, and I don't think it's open anymore. It's a 2-story theater, big balcony, red seats, huge red, what are they called? Open and close.
Curtains?
In front of the screen.
Yeah, just the big curtain or the grand drape or...
What are they? Yeah. And so, there was a big red drape in front of it. They would open up this massive screen. The funny thing is, they sang the national anthem before the movie started, and it was that was the only time that ever happened to me. But then Return of the Jedi turned on, and just absolutely blown away by everything that was coming at me. And so, I knew what film music was, but that was really the first time I got to really feel it and hear it and experience it on the big screen. And I immediately went home and went to my sketchbook. I loved to draw it as a kid, and I was drawing X-wings and TIE fighters, and I'm just singing the Star Wars themes in my head. So that's kind of where it began. But I mean, I didn't know you could buy soundtrack music, and so it was until I was like in high school and I had to do a project on John Williams for my music class that I realized that you can actually get this music on CD and actually own it and listen to it. And it was just it was an incredible experience. And I kept on finding all of John Williams's Boston Pops albums and realizing that John Williams basically composed my childhood. So everything I was listening to, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Jaws, Close Encounters, I mean, it was all coming alive at that moment. And, in and around that time, that's when I started getting a sizable collection and really falling in love with the genre. And then in my second year of college, I started a radio show based on soundtracks. And that's where it all began in 1996, September of 1996 at Mohawk College. And I did 10 years of soundtrack radio before I left, and then transitioned the show over to a streaming program, and then eventually a podcast. And I've been doing it for 25 years.
Wow, that's incredible. As one does when they listen to someone else's story, they often think back to the things that they can relate to, right? So as I'm hearing you talk about the first time you saw Jedi, which is in the theaters, which made me then realize that you're older than I am.
How old was I? Then I was like 7.
It came out in
I think I was
83.
7.
Yeah. And so I was 1. So obviously I didn't get to see it in the theater, but I don't remember how old I was when I watched it the first time. I don't have a moment where I sat down with Dad and said, "This, son, is the first time you will watch the Star Wars," which I did with my child. I actually did, like, this is the Star Wars,
Yep.
But I do, again, I grew up watching them at 6, 7, 8 years old, and I had them on tapes. And I mentioned over the last few weeks, talking about some of the reasons why I'd seen Star Wars so much was simply because it's what we had at the house. So I listened to these soundtracks, but I listened to them with the movie. And the first soundtrack I ever purchased with my own money was actually the soundtrack to Twister.
Excellent.
And it had both score, cues, and the licensed music, the soundtrack. So it had Van Halen's "Human Being" song and Tori Amos and a handful of other artists that I don't remember. But I remember being super stoked when in the movie they tie in the Van Halen song with the score.
Yep,
and I
one of my
remember
all-time favorite moments.
it's such a cool moment. It really is, when it's like,
Yeah, Trevor Rabin's ripping on the guitar.
Yeah.
It is
it's
magical. Those helicopter shots, right, over top of the water tower.
Yeah.
I get goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
It's so, because they're driving
it's
through
so good.
they're driving through. It's right when because there's this comedic thing that's also happening in the moment. Like they're on their way and then they turn down they're taking the shortcut, right? And then all of a sudden they're just in a cornfield, and he's like, "Where's the road, man?" He goes, "Oh, it's just up here." And then they almost crash, and then the music stops. But anyway, it's a great moment in Twister.
It is.
Yeah, in an otherwise fine movie, it's a really great moment.
I had a great time with Twister.
Yeah, no, gosh. But some of the other scores. So I'm most of you who listen to this show know that I'm the son of a band director. Was a music major at App State University, and so been around music all my life. I have one of my favorite soundtracks was Mr. Holland's Opus. Like, I played that one to death. And again, I think we talked about it on, I can't remember what show we talked about, but like, when you add electric guitar to the film, to the score, I remember hearing that. I think the first time I heard it was in Mr. Holland's Opus, thinking, "Oh my gosh, you can do that! Like, that was so cool." So, yeah, it's this really interesting thing. And then for me, it's really interesting. So you talking about, you were getting into it as a kid. I liked it, but I didn't really get into just just listening to film scores, really getting into film scores until I worked on TV shows and movies. Because all day, for 10 hours a day, I listened to people talk. Right? I mean, that was my job, was to listen to them talk and criticize how they talked and make sure that the sound was good on the movie or on the show. And if they slurred a word, I have to like point to the script supervisor to make sure that they got that note down. And so in between takes, I didn't want to listen to music with words. And so I started buying up soundtracks like crazy. And I bought, like at the time, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, the third one had just come out.
Brilliant.
And I loved that score. I probably played that one 30 or 40 times on my breaks. Along with, again, I had like those old iPod classics, that clicks when you spin the wheel. But it had like, I think it had like a 30 gig one or a 32 gig one or something. So I had and again, that was back when you had to buy it, right? Like iTunes now, I pay them what, $4 a month or something, and I can just have whatever I want. But I paid a lot of money so I can have music to listen to, so I wouldn't have to listen to people talk. So that's kind of my background with that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wish it's interesting. The way that I was able to listen to the music away from the film, I did it two ways. I had those 24-page booklet, those story read-alongs. They did Star Wars, Empire, Jedi. They did a whole bunch for Indiana Jones. I think they did a bunch of Star Trek and Black Hole and whatever. And they would have dialogue from the movie, but also the actual film score playing behind it. And so I would play those to death just to listen to whatever the score was that I was listening to. The other way I was able to listen to music, again, without purchasing it, and a lot of film score fans did this, was grab a tape recorder and put it up against the television and just record the movie, or mostly the end credits where you had no dialogue, no sound effects, and hopefully there was an end credit suite and you can listen to the music on its own, and you would hope that no one in the room is going to cough or sneeze or make a noise in the room they're recording. And so that's the way that I generated my first collection of soundtrack music. But as I said, it was that day in the library where I found all of the Boston Pops recordings with all of Williams's music. That was a magical, magical day. And, I started my radio show with 75 albums that I purchased myself. And I thought that was enough to do a 3-hour radio program. And I soon found out that I was running out of CDs rather quickly. But over the years, the collection's just ballooned to over 6,000, and that's because of the record labels who always want to have music played on the show. So, I mean, I could not have kept all these albums behind me or even purchased them on my own if it wasn't for, the support that I had for the program, because this hobby would be really, really, really expensive. Sure. But I just can't believe some of the albums that I do. I mean, I'm going to show this to you, and I know your audience won't be able to see it, but this is my holy grail album. And this I remember finding, I was in college, and this is the Arista 4 CD set of the Star Wars trilogy. And I never owned the LP, the CDs, or the cassettes, and this is the first time I ever bought Star Wars music. And it had all the scores, but with previously unreleased material, over 4 discs, great booklet, great package. And it came out in 1993. I picked mine up, I think, in 1997. Cost me $80, and I spent weeks with that album. And it still remains like one of the greatest things I ever purchased. And just to get a chance to hear Star Wars finally on my own stereo, away from the sound effects and the dialogue, was one of the most magical moments of my entire life. That's a real significant moment in my kind of soundtrack listening.
That's really cool. That's super, super interesting. Yeah, hearing you say that, I mean, it reminded me of a thing, and then we're going to talk about the music itself here in just a second. But one of those moments for me was actually not that long ago when I was able to purchase tickets for myself and my dad. So my dad he was a band director for 30 years, and he's one of the reasons why I loved Star Wars, Star Trek. sci-fi in general, music. He was a lot of that big influence, and not for any reason other than he would just sit and watch it with me. It was never like, "Hey, watch this because this is cool," or "Oh, here's all the information behind it," or whatever. It was always just like, "Hey, I'm gonna watch Star Wars. You want to watch it with me?" It was always just kind of this really kind of sweet, chill moment with Dad. And the first time he took me to the theater was to see Star Trek Generations. And so it's a bad movie, and I know it's a bad movie, but I hold a special place for it in my heart because of what it is in relationship to my dad. So, but I was able to buy tickets to go do the Star Trek experience where they have the orchestra play, and then they have scenes from the movie on a big screen. And it was a really lovely experience, and it's really, really well directed, as in the show itself, not just like conducted. I mean, the musicians are great, but like they really want to play on your emotions. So it's not like it's just whole scenes from a movie or from the shows and the movies. It is scenes, but they're picked specifically together so that when they're playing the music, you're getting an overarching theme, right? So like we're going to play the Klingon theme. So you're going to get different battle scenes from whatever. Or we're going to play, the really sweet part when, there's a sad part happening and you're going to get... I mean, there's a moment when right before they cut to intermission, Dad and I are both literally wiping our tears off our face because it was all of the sad moments in Trek together in these moments. And I'm just looking at Dad and he's like, "Don't judge me." I'm like, "I'm crying too, man. It's fine," So it was real special.
Yeah, those moments are so sacred. And I'm not sure whether you know about the live in concert series where they play scores to the movies.
Yeah.
So I got to see Empire Strikes Back with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Just listening to one of my all-time favorite scores of all time played live in complete form was magical, but I got to take my son to go see it with me. I mean, he likes the movies. He used to watch them as a kid, but he's not a huge fan, but he knew how important it was for me. And my daughter didn't want to go. My wife didn't want to go, but my wife said, take Liam. I think it'd be something that he would enjoy. And we did, and he still talks about it to this day and how great of an experience it was, even though, he can recall a few themes and he might not watch the movies, but he knows that was a very, very, very special moment for me. But it was a special moment, not just because I got to see one of my favorite movies and hear one of my favorite scores, but, being there with my son. I got to see Raiders Lost Ark with him as well, and the same sort of feeling. I mean, those are just incredible events, and I'm not sure. Yeah, and seeing these movies. The great thing about Star Wars, and seeing some of your favorite movies with your kids is getting to see their first reactions to certain things, or hearing certain things for the very first time. It's like reliving the movie for the very first time, but you're reliving it through your children's eyes. And so seeing Star Wars with my kids, and I think all parents go through this. Again, another magical moment, and you get to see. I mean, I don't remember. While it was really tough for me to experience the, "I am your father" sequence because I already knew that, having watched Return of the Jedi first. So getting to introduce that to my son and getting to see his reaction, I even took pictures, and him literally turning around and looking at me with his mouth open, right, and not knowing what to do and what to say. And the first thing he came out of his mouth was, "Really?" And I think most people back then also said the exact same thing. So getting to experience that sort of stuff with family members for the very first time is quite magical. And yeah, even the same thing with the music. We would play Duel of the Fates constantly because that was one of his favorite things to listen to, because he always liked the episode 1 lightsaber battle. So yeah, John Williams is, his impact is just as great as George Lucas's in movies. It's John Williams to music and film scoring. I mean, back in 1977, that was something That was something new, or he brought something back, and people took notice. It was a definite change for film music back in May of 1977.
It definitely was, and that's a good jumping off point. I do have to interject one last little personal thing. So I am envious of you that you got to have that moment with your son. My son, he discovered YouTube before, you know.
Oh, no.
So he knew all about the Vader parts. He knew all about it. So when we got to sit down and finally watch Empire Strikes Back, he had known for 3 years. But we also watched it for the first time with my 5-year-old daughter, which I thought it might be, some of the stuff might be kind of over her head. And so she was sitting in my lap when that moment happened. And then she just kind of looked at me and she goes, "Wait, what?" You know, the 5-year-old. And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Okay." So, I mean, it didn't really bother. Honestly, the only thing that bothered her, the thing that affected her the most was the Rancor scene from
Oh, wow.
Jedi. That
Wow.
part scared her a little bit.
Hmm.
And I said, "Hey, just remember, it's just a puppet, right? It's just a puppet. It's not real." But anyway, she still buried her head in my chest. But specifically going back to your point about John Williams and he kind of, the one thing that I remember, again, is I say remember from hearing about it, reading about it, learning about it in school and just in life, was that, you know, in the 70s, it was very much the rage to do synthesized music, right? It was very, you know, keyboard synthesized, like, you know, having your Flash Gordon scored by Queen, you know, like it was very different time. So it was very, frankly, ballsy of George Lucas to go to John Williams and say, "I want full orchestra." And it was a gutsy call to do this. And I mean, obviously it paid off. I mean, it's regarded as the best soundtrack ever. You know, it won 1,000 awards, and it kind of, I mean, Star Wars changed the industry altogether, right? I mean, putting the credits at the end of the movie, that was a big damn deal in '77. I mean, he got sued, or a lawsuit was brought against him, and he said, "Hey, you know, it's just, you know, we won't do it again." Well, then he did it again for Empire, and then they went to sue him again, but by that point the industry had kind of corrected itself, and so then all movies started doing that kind of thing, that cold open straight into the movie. But I mean, George Lucas and John Williams, man, they were bucking trends and setting, you know, all this stuff. It was very crazy what they did, these trendsetters in the late 70s.
Yeah, it was a really weird time, like you said, for music. There was a lot of experimentation going on, and I've, you know, talked to a bunch of people who will, you know, we all say, you know, John Williams changed film music for the better, or brought back the orchestral score that was seemingly dead from the golden age. And there's some people that say, you know, it was John Williams' Star Wars was quite possibly one of the worst things that has ever happened to film music, because it essentially killed a bunch of styles that were in style at the time in the 70s, and those scores weren't being written anymore. Everybody wanted the big John Williams orchestral sound, and that lasted for quite a while. And then, you know, Vangelis came by and basically turned, you know, soundtrack music on its head in '81 and '82 with Chariots of Fire and Blade Runner. But yeah, 1977 was an interesting time, because, you know, John Williams was as you said, a very forward-thinking person at that time, and, you know, he was very conscious as to what was being laid into science fiction at that time, which was mostly electronic music, and he felt that was very cliche. And so he knew right from the beginning, when he started editing his film, that he started putting up music from his classical collection as the temp track. And the temp track bleeds through in Williams' score, and we all know that. You know, we get Holtz and Stravinsky, and you know, you can even say Eric Wolfgang's Korngold's King's Row for the main title. But that's where he was going with it. He was bucking the trend. He wanted to do something completely different. However, from reading through the J.W. Rinsler Making of Star Wars book, George Lucas did, for a brief moment, want to create a score that was a mix of country and Western music with a full orchestra, which is kind of neat. It's sort of what they're doing on The Mandalorian,
Yeah.
because they've made Mandalorian into a Western, and you have those kind of Western tropes in that score by Ludwig Göransson. So that was thought about back in 1975, 76, when Lucas was compiling the temp track or thinking about the music. But it was really the meeting with Steven Spielberg that solidified, John Williams being hired, because Spielberg recommended him for when he was working with him on Jaws, and George Lucas liked the score to Jaws, so they said, "Yeah, John Williams is your man," and that's how John Williams got involved with Star Wars.
Wow. I just, the idea that he killed a genre of music from that time is an interesting kind of thing to think about, because now again, I'm a kid of the 90s. I was born in 82, but the 90s is where I kind of, grew up, so to speak, and I have an appreciation for music of the 70s and 80s, but I look back and listen back to some of that stuff back then. It's kind of bad in my opinion, and maybe bad's the wrong word, but it's just different, and it doesn't kind of jive with what I like. So personally, just me talking, I'm kind of glad he killed some of that other stuff. But I do like Vangelis's there. Again, like you said, Chariots of Fire, and I love what they did with Blade Runner, and I also really like that the idea of doing synth pop is the wrong word, but like that kind of synth orchestra. I mean, you look at like that, like what Daft Punk did for Tron Legacy. Say what you want about that movie. The music is really, really good for that movie, and there's been other examples of it. And I know we're getting. I know it's not new to have film scores be not conducted, but like composed by pop stars. I mean, guys, Junkie XL is really hot right now, but I mean, even back in the day, you still had Queen doing stuff. I mean, Queen did the actual. Well, they did the songs for Highlander. I recently recently watched Highlander for another podcast, and which it was funny. I didn't know. I thought, because I was told that Queen did the soundtrack for Highlander, so I thought Queen wrote the score to Highlander, which he did not, or they did not. So I'm listening to the music, and there's a couple of moments where I go, man, did Michael Kamen rip off this movie for Prince of Thieves? Because this sounds just like Prince of Thieves. And then I get on IMDb while we're recording, and I'm like, holy crap, Michael Kamen did the score for Highlander. So he probably thought, in 92 when he did Prince of Thieves, no one saw Highlander, so I could borrow from myself, so it's fine.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he definitely has a distinct style, for sure. I mean, you listen to, like I said, you can even listen to Mr. Holland's Opus, and you could find, Mr. Holland's Opus in Band of Brothers. You can find Lethal Weapon in Edge of Darkness. You can find Robin Hood in one of his last scores, Back to Gaia. I think that's the name of the film. He definitely had a very, very distinct style. He was really one of the best. I mean, he was an incredible rock and roller who had this gift for the symphony orchestra, and he can write a tune and orchestrate the hell out of a symphony orchestra. The guy was incredible, and unfortunately left us way too soon. But yeah, he was great.
And another guy I point to, because again, these guys, these giants in this industry, your John Williams, your James Horners. I always kind of think of John Williams, James Horner, and Jerry Goldsmith as kind of being equals of their time. And I'm not saying that Goldsmith or Horner are as good as Williams, but I think they have produced music that is as good as Williams. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, that's my trifecta. That's my holy
Yeah,
trinity of composers. That's who I grew up with.
right.
Those are the three that I grew up with and grew up with. They introduced me to film music. Those three, and then everything just went off of them, and to finding guys like James Newton Howard and Danny Elfman and Alan Silvestri
Sure.
and whatnot. But yeah, back in the well, I mean, Goldsmith was already writing stuff in the 50s and 60s
yeah.
and 70s. He's one of those innovators in the 70s that was doing some weird and wacky stuff, and John Williams could have easily, killed his career. But yeah, James Horner came off of Goldsmith and Williams. So love those three. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, those three defined my childhood because, again, Goldsmith created Star Trek, right? I mean, I know Alexander Courage wrote the theme, but, I have the way wrong name. Gene Roddenberry. I almost said Gene Hackman, and then I almost said somebody else. I almost said Jerry Roddenberry. There we go. So Gene Roddenberry wanted Goldsmith to compose the theme, and Goldsmith says, I can't, but here's my guy, Alexander Courage, and so the two of them collaborated to create that theme for Star Trek, so that when it was time to do the motion picture, the natural choice was Goldsmith, and the theme that he wrote for the motion picture would eventually become the theme for The Next Generation, and then he would go on to do Voyager and Star Trek V and 7 and 8 and 9. I mean, I know he's not like John Williams has done all of the original 9. Of course, Michael Giacchino did Rogue One, and the other
John Powell.
Powell did Solo, and I love John Powell. He's one of my
Yes.
the new guys on the block. I love John Powell. Probably a little more.
I think he's the best composer working today.
He's
even more so than John Williams. I think Powell's the guy.
Yeah, I do too.
He's perfect.
Yeah, and I love, and again, and I think Hans Zimmer, Zimmer is kind of like that bridge between your Williams, generation and like your John Powell, Giacchino guys, but like Zimmer's like the middle there, and Zimmer's still great, but I mean, I still get fired up whenever I hear How to Train Your Dragon. It's just he should have won that Oscar. I
agree completely.
I still have this fight.
Yep, I agree.
Anyway, not my point. My point is that yes, those titles. We were also kind of talking about how they kind of borrow from each other, which I think is okay. I really do, because there are times when I'll be watching, especially an older movie, a Williams movie. Like for example, we did for the podcast The Adventures of Tintin, which is a Spielberg directed Williams a joint, and there's a specific scene. Have you seen that movie, Adventures of Tintin?
Oh yeah.
So the
Yes.
one shot, it's a one shot, which I love.
Yep.
And now again, it's a CGI movie, so it's not as cool as say the one shot from Atonement or in Serenity or Daredevil or 1917. But it's when the guy fires the bazooka and blows up the dam, and so we have this whole scene. And the music is wonderful, but I'm sitting there listening going, okay, well, that's Raiders of the Lost Ark. And, okay, that sounds a little bit like Far and Away. And that, what I'm saying? There's a lot of these moments, right? And which is, I still love because Tintin kind of feels like all of those characters kind of rolled into one. And to my point, I was trying to make also about that Michael Kamen was like specifically James Horner. I can listen to a James Horner piece of music for about 5 minutes, and as soon as I hear that trumpet part, I go, "Oh yeah, that's James Horner." He loved that trumpet part. So anyway, that was a long monologue to get to where I was trying to get. Was just simply that I know composers borrow from themselves, and
yeah, they have a particular style. I mean, Horner is infamously known for taking a theme from here and using it there and borrowing this from there and that, and then grabbing a classical piece of music and just using it, note for note in his score, or maybe changing a note here and there. And huge controversy with James Horner, especially in the film music community. But I still think that he was one of the best dramatists, and he wrote some of the most, if not the most emotional music I have ever heard in in film. I mean, there are so many scenes and films that I've watched that it's because of the music that Horner wrote that just has me almost sobbing. And there's no other composer that has really done that consistently. And Williams has his isms. There's things that are distinctly John Williams. He and you can hear his influences. They're obvious. I mean, the guy knows what he's doing. Classically trained, he knows his classical music. He's a pianist himself. He's a jazz composer, musician. I mean, the guy knows anything and everything. I mean, you can talk about Holtz and Stravinsky and Bruckner and all you want in Star Wars, but what I find and found that he did with Star Wars and going back to that is, I mean, you have the dreaded temp track. Composers hate temp tracks, and if you tell a composer to, stick with the temp track, I want exactly that. I mean, you're restricting your composer. There's only so much that composer can do to make it different, and composers get blamed for that all the time. But Williams took the temp track and understood what he needed to do. I mean, he stayed fairly close to it, even though it was said that Ivanhoe was, Nicholas Roche's Ivanhoe was played over the main title. Many people say that it sounds like Eric Wolfgang Korngold's King's Row. But there's other pieces that you can tell. Yeah, that comes from Stravinsky, that comes from Holst and whatnot. But the way he molds it all together into kind of one singular piece or symphonic work, it becomes a John Williams thing. That is John Williams, especially with the way that he writes his themes. Those themes are so distinctly Star Wars. You will not mistake them for anything else. So a really talented, skilled composer can take that temp track, but make something of it that feels fresh and new.
Yeah, totally agree. And yeah, I don't want to keep doing this. I'm doing it to myself. I'm sabotaging my own show. But there's a fun little story that you may or may not be aware of. But Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, famously sounds like Mars from the Gustav Holst suite, Mars. And Mars is used a lot, right? Bringer of War, whatever. So the director, who also directed Episode 2 or Wrath of Khan, he was looking for a specific sound, and they used Mars as that temp track. And Horner was unavailable. It wasn't like he said no; he was just unavailable. And then I think they went to Goldsmith and said, "We want you to write basically a Star Trek version of Mars." And he said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm either going to write it the way I want to write it, the way that it should fit the movie, because a lot of the themes about the movie is the upcoming war that eventually doesn't happen." And he didn't do it. And so they hired another guy who basically said, "I'm looking for a job. I'll do whatever you want me to do." So, yeah.
Yeah, Eidelman wrote a demo based on those notes. He's like, this is what we want. This is what we need. This is what the main title is like. And so Cliff Eidelman wrote about a 2.5, 3-minute demo piece. That is essentially what you hear over the main title of the film now. But yeah, I mean, Nicholas Meyer has wanted to use Holtz's The Planets. I think he wanted it on Star Trek 2 and then tried again on Star Trek 6. It's just so expensive to license. It's almost impossible. Yeah. So you might as well get a composer to do what you want to do. So, but yeah, Cliff Eidelman did for as young as he was too, he was in his early mid-20s, much like Horner was when he did Star Trek 2. Eidelman was fresh, just brand new, and he knocked that score out of the park.
Oh yeah, it's still a really good score. I mean, it really is, and he did a really good job on it. And I do think it's interesting that Trek would be, because at that point, like Star Wars, to take a chance on John Williams, they were taking chances everywhere because they couldn't afford to be super safe. But this is the 6th movie of a very established franchise that to take a chance on this other guy is pretty interesting. It's really interesting. So, but it still reminds me of the Ray Parker Lewis / Huey Lewis and the News debate. When
Yes.
when
Yes.
the producers of Ghostbusters went to Huey Lewis and said, "Hey, that song, I Want a New Drug, we want you to write a song that sounds exactly the same, but only for Ghostbusters." And he said no. And then Ray Parker Lewis was like, "I'll do it." So he did. That's why it sounds exactly the same.
Yep. Yeah, and it's there's composers that have been taken to court for various different reasons. Famously James Horner got in trouble with the Nitaroda estate for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I think Hans Zimmer got in trouble with the Holtz estate for Gladiator. I'm pretty sure Williams might have gotten sued at some point for something that he ripped off somewhere. It happens. It just happens. But like I said, it's usually it is mostly due to the directors who get stuck with the temp track, because it really is the only aspect of the movie that is really out of their control. They cannot write the music themselves. And on top of that,
Unless you're
directors have
James-
a
unless
really,
you're,
really hard time talking musically to a composer. Composers would rather you not try to talk musically to them. They're like, give me a feeling of the scene, or tell me sort of what you want here and what you want there, but try not to say I want 6 oboes and 5 French horns and this, that, and doing a ostinato here and blah, blah, blah. Don't say that to a composer. You've got to trust your composer. That's a very, very hard thing to do. Nowadays, with computer technology and the amount of demos that composers essentially have to write a score, flesh it out electronically with their samples, and put it up against the picture before they even go to the recording stage. Where back then, George Lucas has a spotting session with John Williams and says, we want themes for this person, this person, this person, this person. This is an exciting part. No music here, music here. And then Williams spends 2 months on his own writing whatever he's writing. And George Lucas is just like, I'm going to edit. And hopefully when we get to the stage in London with the London Symphony Orchestra, what John Williams is going to perform for us is going to be exactly what we need. And that's a scary thing for a director. Especially back then when you can only hear maybe a piano reduction of a score. And that's why you got to be, you got to be a trusting director with your composer. You got to have a great relationship with your composer. And John Williams has great relationships, great collaborations. And, he found one with Lucas, found it with Steven Spielberg and numerous other directors as well. So, and that's why they use him. He's just so good at what he does.
Yeah, well, when you're really, really great at it, it makes the director's job a lot easier to trust you, to go off and do the thing. Like you said, in 77, that's what you did. Last time I'm going to do this, I promise. Okay, I don't promise. But there's a great vignette that they did for the behind the scenes on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. That was Ron Wise? Ray Wise.
Robert
Wise directed. Thank you. The guy that did The Sound of Music. No, right?
West Side Story.
I thought he did The Sound of Music too.
He might have.
I think he did.
I don't know. Okay.
Anyway, he's the director, and Goldsmith is the composer. And Goldsmith, basically, he wrote the theme as if it was a sailing ship, right? The Enterprise is a sailing ship. It's a nautical theme, and they're doing the scene where they're unveiling the new Enterprise, and you have like this. It's like a 7-minute, shot of showing off the Enterprise. I mean, it's like starship porn, basically, right? And and they listen to the music that was written, and the director just looks at him and just walks out of the studio. He just walks away, and Goldsmith chases him down. And he goes, "What's wrong?" And he goes, he's kind of hemming and hawing because he doesn't want to hurt his feelings, right? And Goldsmith finally just says, "You have to tell me what's wrong." And he says, "There's no theme. There's no theme." And then they went back and listened to it, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. There's no theme. It's just like this, it's just music." And so when he wrote it, so that when the camera pans and you get the full on the Enterprise, is when you get the downbeat of the the da 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 da. That's how they got to the theme, is because there wasn't one. He had to create a theme. I love that kind of stuff. So, and that's again,
Yeah, I mean, there was a germ of a theme in the unused cues. It was there. You can hear it. It was a few notes away from being what we now know as the classic Jerry Goldsmith theme. The feeling of the Enterprise cue, what you're talking about, it's still there. But you're right. It's just the actual melody just wasn't developed enough. And Goldsmith didn't have one at the time. He just didn't. It was really one of the toughest things that he had to do. But then eventually he went back, and I think there was about 7 cues that he had to completely re-record, because then he finally had that theme, and that's when the score came alive. And I mean, even John Williams would tell you that when writing, the themes for Star Wars, you never know when inspiration's gonna hit. And there are times where he says that he could be sitting at a piano just noodling away, and it would take him 2 weeks to find a theme. Or there are times where, and I'm thinking it was the Raiders March, where that theme just came off really easy for him, and then just developed everything around that. And I mean, thematic music also came very easily for someone like James Horner, who we were talking about earlier. But Williams would be one of the first to admit that as much of, all the classics themes that he wrote just for this series, just for these first 3 movies, I mean, just think about all the melodies they had to come up with. And some of them are just all-time classics. I mean, he could be working at these and trying to find the right note, the right orchestration, anything, and it could take him weeks. Whereas something like, I mean, who knows how long it took him to come up with the Imperial March? That could have been a day. It could have been 2 weeks. But eventually it hits these guys. And the other thing is the amount of pressure that these composers are under. From what I was reading, Williams really had about 2 months to basically spot the movie and then write his score. I mean, that's not a lot of time. I mean, 8 weeks, I mean, it seems to be normal for movie composers. But I mean, when composers are just writing on their own with symphonies, they've got months and months and months to develop a full piece of music. But these guys have got to be inspired now, right away. Time is money, and it better be good, or else you're going to be replaced. So I don't envy composers and the amount of work that they have to do in order to just be inspired immediately. I can't imagine how Williams came up with all these themes. Yeah. It is just one of the greatest accomplishments in not only film score history, but in film history, I think.
Well, and a thing that's very specific to this, because I was watching kind of in preparation for this, for tonight, I was watching some other interviews with John Williams, and the fact that, Empire Strikes Back, I think that's what it was, Empire Strikes Back, or maybe, the interview was in preparation for The Phantom Menace. The interview the clip that I played for beginning was for promotion for The Phantom Menace, and that's what I'm trying to remember. I'm gonna make sure I get my fact right, but he had all the music from Star Wars already, but I think it was for Empire Strikes Back, in which 90% of the music was new. Like it's the sequel movie, but 90% is brand new. And that almost feels like that's kind of like unheard of. I'm sure that happens probably more than I realize. I'm sure that of the 6 Mission Impossible movies, other than the Mission Impossible theme from the TV show, I would bet that a lot of the music score is probably very different. But those movies don't rely on the score to make you think or feel. They're just relying on Tom Cruise to do some next crazy stunt. But I mean, just again, that's what has always really, really impressed me about John Williams and these movies in particular, these 3 movies in particular, is that you used the phrase earlier when we were chatting offline, calling your needle drop moments. And I didn't quite understand what you're talking about,
yes.
But to define it, needle drop moments is basically when you just take the record from the last movie and just stick it into the score of your new movie. And I've gone on several soapbox. I'm not going to do it tonight. in other movies, particularly the Harry Potter movies, where they do that, and it really angers me because it's lazy. And I'm not talking about like, ooh, there's Leia on screen in Empire, so we're going to play the Leia theme. I'm talking about the exact same 2.5-minute track that you wrote for the 5th movie of Harry Potter, and now you're going to insert into the 6th movie of Harry Potter. I don't feel like there's really ever any true moments of that in these 3 movies.
There is only really, I mean, there's 2 different ways you can talk about needle drops or reuse of music. So in Return of the Jedi, just as they're about to fire on the reactor inside the second Death Star, they inexplicably play some Empire Strikes Back music for the first 30 seconds instead of the Through the Flames track, which John Williams wrote. Now, eventually it segues into the Through the Flames track that Williams wrote, and it works perfectly, but I have no idea why they decided that they needed to replace like the first 30 seconds of it, because it's actually really well done and it fits the visuals perfectly. And there's a couple of changes here and there in Empire Strikes Back as well, but they're not overly noticeable. But in Return of the Jedi, especially with the sail barge battle sequence, that one was being edited constantly, and that film was notorious for being way behind. I mean, there's so many effect shots in that movie that Williams, when he was writing the score, he saw a version of the film, but then he was only given a couple reels at a time to complete. So he would be handed 2 completed reels that had completed effect shots, and he would write to that because that film is locked. Then they'd hand him another couple of reels 2 weeks later. He'd write to that. Then another couple of reels, and he'd write to that. So it was really tough for him to kind of find an emotional, dramatic arc over the film, because he was just writing it so sporadically and only being able to see certain reels at certain times. But it still works. But the sail barge battle was just so heavily edited. It was insane. And Williams wrote a completely different sail barge cue than what you hear in the movie. It is vastly different. And that was essentially taken right out, with the exception of the victory fanfare that you hear right at the end of that cue. And it had to be rewritten so quickly because they were behind schedule that they essentially had someone else basically orchestrate that cue and find pieces from the first Star Wars movie, essentially the TIE fighter attack and the last battle music, and insert those pieces of music note for note, although it's a brand new performance, into that action sequence. It works really, really well, I think. It's great. It's great to hear the Rebel fanfare in full glory during that part, because the Rebels are finally all back together for the first time since Empire, and they're kicking butt. So it works for me. Another portion is the superstructure chase, where they're flying through the Death Star and heading towards the big reactor, and you basically get a note-for-note playing of the TIE fighter attack music from Star Wars. It's note-for-note with a couple of different variations to match certain things that are happening on screen, but I mean, that's exactly what Williams wrote for Star Wars, and it doesn't happen all that often in the original trilogy. Like you said, everything else is original. I mean, even going to Empire Strikes Back, anytime the Imperial March is played, it's never played the same way twice. All those transition cues are all completely different orchestrations, played by different instruments, different time signatures, different keys. It's unbelievable how many different ways that Williams plays the Imperial March, and it's played a lot in that movie.
Yeah.
So he had to write these different variations so you never got tired of it. Empire is just an absolute masterwork. And I mean, I love all 3 of them, but I think Empire Strikes Back remains still one of the greatest scores ever composed.
Totally agree. And I re-listened to all of them today, kind of in preparation for our conversation. And, but I mean, to be fair, and unannounced, like most people, we're busy. We're busy people. I have a job plus this gig, and being a dad. Like, I don't have a lot of time to just sit and listen to music. So fortunately, today I had a work day that allowed me that I could. This is going to sound bad, but I had some mindless tasks to do today. Right? It's it's a couple days before Thanksgiving. All I'm literally doing is trying to get certain we call it digital signage. Just trying to get the digital signage displays to work. I mean, it's as basic as you get. So I was re-listening to this, so I was able to really listen for things that I don't normally get to hear because you're distracted by the visuals, and and so hearing you talk about, like, there's these little kind of motifs and moments that are dropped in, kind of merged. Like, I remember listening to the Return of the Jedi, the soundtrack, and when you've seen the movie so many times that you hear the music, you know what scene it is, even though for some reason the album is not in order, which is weird to me. I don't know why I don't like that, but anyway,
Blame John Williams.
Sure, I'll blame him.
He does it on purpose for listenability.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can go into that later. But anyway, continue.
And it's fine. It's his choice. I don't really. It's whatever. It annoys me, but also there's also kind of like, ooh, which is next? It's going to be Luke and Leia, okay, and then it's the parade of Ewoks, right? So, but when it got to the reactor scene, you mentioned to me, I think earlier, specifically about that, and I was listening for it, and I still didn't pick up on it, and I was listening for it. So that's how subtle it is, or that's just how I'm not trained enough to.
Yeah, you won't hear it on the album. You won't hear that needle drop on the album at all. And it depends on which album you're listening to, because the first time Through the Flames was ever released was on the 1993 Arista box set, because Return of the Jedi was the only album out of the 3 films that had a single LP release, just one. Star Wars was a double LP, and Empire was double LP. But apparently they were losing money. There was a lot of money that had to be given upfront for the rights to the music, and I think what's the record label, RSO? They didn't want to pay that much for Jedi, and so that's why it was a 1-disc release. So that's why a lot of music, from Return of the Jedi was missing off that album.
It's 11 tunes.
You didn't get it until 1993, and then subsequently you got it on the special edition releases that came out in 1997. So that track. So I don't know which one you were listening to, but you can. But the needle drops or any edits that you hear in the film will not be on the soundtrack.
Okay. Yeah, I was listening to the 83 one. I wanted to listen to
that's
as early as one that I felt like was supposed to be the original, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's the LP.
Yeah.
So that one is a lot of concert suites. So I'm not sure if you know, but Williams wrote, and still does to this day, he'll write alternate versions of tracks, or he will create concert suites of his themes. So the Jabba the Hutt music you hear on the album, actually I don't even think that's on the album. The Jabba the Hutt theme, or let's say even the Parade of Ewoks, or Luke and Leia, those are all concert suites. Those are you will not hear those as played on the album in the movie. And he does that with Empire, like Imperial March, Yoda's theme. They're all concert suites. Even Princess Leia's theme on Star Wars is a brand new recording that was not used in the film. And he does that quite often with his films. So I mean, he's just the way he developed themes and creates these little concert pieces within 5 minutes it's just incredible. But yeah, like Jedi's a tough one to get through because it's just full of concert suites, source music, and a lot of the music that you wanted to hear is not there. And I think it's only like a 40-minute release.
It's 11 like songs, 45 minutes.
Oh, that's brutal. That's brutal. And the first time you got to hear the complete score again was in 1997 on the RCA Victor releases, which still isn't that great. The elements sucked, so the sound was compromised. And so, I mean, we've been waiting as a soundtrack community since 1997 to hear a proper remastered release of all of these scores, Jedi especially, in proper sound, and we still haven't got it. So, I mean, what I listen to usually is the 97 Arista release, which I think expanded the score by, I think it was like 70, 80 minutes or so. So there's tons of unreleased stuff on the 93 release.
Interesting. I need to get my hands on that if I can find it. Either, like, I'm currently.
Oh, you'd find the box set dirt cheap, I think. I've seen a lot on there, and like I said, when I got this brand new, it was $85. But I'm sure you can find it for cheap.
Well, I was looking for like online services, like I'm on Spotify, and the only thing I can find is the remastered Return of the Jedi 1983.
Yep. And they do that on purpose. Yeah. They did it on purpose. They don't want anything else out but those albums.
I get that.
Lucasfilm and Disney.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about Return of the Jedi. We're going to go out of order, but I don't really care.
Sure.
One of the few things that I did want to just kind of chat with you specifically about the music was, what are some of our favorite cues from each movie? And I hadn't really thought about it, honestly, for the original Star Wars or Return of the Jedi. For Empire Strikes Back, that's easy for me. It's the asteroid field. I mean, it's easy for me because of not just the sound, the music, but how the music is connected to the movie. I mean, it feels like, as John Williams is watching the Falcon fly through these asteroids, he goes, okay, the Falcon swerved to the left. Well, the high strings are on the left side of the orchestra, so they're going to get the part. And then the Falcon ducks low. Well, that means I need to get some low brass in here. Like, it feels like he did this. And then another thing that he's really brilliant about, and I learned this in school, is when the camera transitions from up close shots, and then you want to hit with a wide shot, you want to have a music impact. And on asteroid field specifically, when the Falcon's flying through, and then it kind of pans back a little bit when we get the Falcon that dives in on that big asteroid, and you get that hit that just smacks you in the face, that brass. It's so impactful, and it's really, really great.
Yeah, what's interesting about what you were just talking about, especially that cut, I find that the 2-second delay before you see the Falcon come from behind the asteroid, because it cuts away from, he says, never tell me the odds. And then we get that cut, and it's a close-up of the asteroid, and it's moving away from the camera. There's a little bit of an explosion in one of the craters, but Williams is playing this, it's a busy string passage, but it's still very quiet. And it's this little string run for a couple of seconds, and then once the Falcon comes around the asteroid, I mean, the theme he creates, and again, this is the only time that we're going to hear this melody in the movie until we get to Solo, and John Powell reuses it, but we never hear the melody for the asteroid field action sequence ever again. And it just, it's in the high register, and it just screams along with the heroism of Han Solo, and seeing the Millennium Falcon and it darting back and forth from the TIE fighters. As you said, it's absolutely thrilling, and the entire piece is just so playful, and like you said, it does hit certain sync points. Like, like when the Falcon is, darting back and forth, Williams is introducing these trombone blasts, this dun 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 dun, as the Falcon, moves towards the camera and flies away. It's almost as if he's speaking for the Falcon. It's quite interesting. But yeah, the asteroid field is, I mean, some of the most sublime action scoring you'll ever hear, and that even comes after the 20 minutes that you heard on the Battle of Hoth, and that's some incredible action music as well. But then, I mean, you end it with the asteroid field. Sensational.
Well, the thing that's really interesting specifically on Hoth is I hadn't really noticed it before, because Hoth is, for me, way more about the visuals, because there's so much happening. It's such chaos. It's just, it's a huge battle. And I never really got to cue in on the music until today, where I was really listening, going, "Oh my gosh, this is great." Whereas the asteroid field, you're really cued in on the music because there's zero dialogue. It's just the Falcon kind of flying around doing this stuff. I mean, like once he gets past the line, I want to get closer. You don't get any more dialogue for a while, right? And you just kind of get to just bathe in the music. But yeah, the Hoth battle is really. It's just high energy. It's really, really great.
Yeah, and it's an insane orchestration as well. It was one of the most oddly produced tracks, like the opening battle in the snow cue, where we first see the walkers. The walkers are represented by two grand pianos, and they just make this absolutely enormous sound. But what Williams wanted to do with that cue in particular was have it to be as mechanical sounding as possible. So he included 5 piccolos, 5 oboes, 8 percussionists, as I said, 2 grand pianos, and up to 3 harps that are just creating some of the most wild, insane, again, hard-hitting orchestrations. Because again, with all the percussion and the snares, the cymbals, the marimbas, and the timpanis just all going crazy. I mean, it's an absolutely busy, insane piece. And while that's all happening, the woodwinds are going bananas, the strings are going bananas, same with the brass. It is absolute chaos. And that's exactly what's happening on screen. And I just absolutely love that, even though Williams is writing, film music, something to accompany a film, and most likely a lot of what you're going to hear is just going to get buried by sound effects, he still feels that he has to be the best creatively and artistically. And so he just goes all out with his orchestration, whether you're going to hear it or not, and creates just these incredible just pieces of music that can be enjoyed not only in the film, but also enjoyed outside of the film. And I think that's what really makes John Williams a genius.
So we jumped right in the middle. I was going to do Jedi first, or I guess we can do A New Hope first. But those pieces of music are just so high energy, and they're just so attention grabbing that it's hard not to talk about them first. So there we go. We talked about our favorites first, and I think that's pretty evident. This is going to be a little weird. Could you hear the music I was playing, by the way? Okay,
I
I
could,
just want to
yes.
make sure. You were talking right over it, and I thought, he's a pro. He knows what he's doing. Okay. Yeah, either we're going to get sued or we're not. It's fine. So let's go back and talk about A New Hope. So, A New Hope,
Sure.
I was going back and listening to it today specifically for this part. I wanted to make sure that I had a moment, because obviously the opening credits the opening credits is one of the most iconic pieces of music in the world, right? I mean, there's probably,
Agreed.
I don't know, what do you think? Maybe there's probably 10 pieces of music that you could play to 10 strangers on the street that would get the majority of them, right? Like, I think most Americans or North Americans and maybe Western English-speaking Europe would probably get Star Wars. I'm not even going to say Star Trek. It's probably not, but definitely Star Wars. Maybe like the Mission Impossible theme. I'm trying to think. What are some other ones that are just super iconic that people...
Probably Jaws.
Jaws, yeah. Jaws, definitely a good one. That's a great one, Jaws. Maybe the Tim Burton Batman. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm wondering how powerful Titanic is still to this day. I think if you play
the Celine Dion
opening,
song,
the song, I think you'd nail it. I think you can
Yeah.
get it.
I think maybe even
I'm trying to think, like Pirates of
the Caribbean.
maybe?
I
Maybe?
think that's a pretty. The problem is that there's so much other music that sounds kind of like it. So like I could play Gladiator, and my kids think it's Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm like, oh,
Right, yes.
And that's a whole other thing, and we're not going to get into that. I think
absolutely.
maybe Superman, John Williams' Superman, also pretty.
You know how many times people have confused that with Star Wars? It's insane. It's happened a lot. You'll play it and you're like, is that Star Wars? They all think it's Star
I can
Wars.
kind of get that. I do. I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of some others.
Yep.
I mean,
But I
Chariots
think,
of
like,
Fire.
maybe Indiana Jones is something that you can pick up,
Sure.
after a few notes. You just know that's what it is.
Yeah, I do think that, but I think that fits probably for people that watch movies. I was trying to think of, like, again, random guy off the street, like maybe Chariots of Fire.
Mm.
Maybe
Yeah, maybe,
because they did
Things have been
it's
parodied.
been parodied. Well, they also put it in the Olympics, for goodness sake, in the London Olympics,
that's
with
right.
Mr. Bean hitting the single dum 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 dum. It was
That's
one of the
right.
funniest bits I've ever seen when it comes to music. So I think it's safe to say that the Star Wars theme, that was one of the most iconic ever. So I'm going to put that one aside, as to say is we're not going to use that one for A New Hope. So when I was listening back to it today, the part that really got my ears perked up, and I actually stopped what I was doing and just sat and listened, was the TIE fighter attack on the Falcon. That, to me, was really kind of it's like, oh, because I've heard the Imperial. I have a lot of these on my phone that I play in the car with my kids. When the kids are in the car with me, we're listening to film scores. When they're with their mother, she listens to popular music, pop music and stuff, country music, stuff like that. Not saying one's right or wrong. I'm just saying my music is better. But she also doesn't listen to this podcast, so it doesn't matter. But we listen to film scores, and it's so funny. You're going to love this. So my son, first thing he gets in the car, Daddy, can we listen to Star Wars? Sure. So I'll put on
Nice.
Asteroid Field. Actually, his favorite. I'm going to play a little bit, and I know you know this, but I'm going to play a little bit of this for you. It's from... let's see if I don't know if I have it on this computer or not. It's the score from what's it called? It's not before the finale of Phantom Menace, right? And it's what's it called? Augie's Parade or something like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I had never noticed it until I hadn't noticed it until recently, listening to it with my son. The trumpet part is synthesized, because the notes are so high, you couldn't. You know what I'm saying? Like a person can't play that high. Is my point. Let's see if I can.
Right.
I can cue it up here. Nope. So this is the parade I'm talking about here, right?
Yep.
And I love this little trumpet part here. This is just such a. I'm going to skip forward here. There we go. Hear that? Yeah, that's not real trumpets. Real trumpets don't sound like that.
No. Or they're either processed.
It could be that.
I mean,
it could be
who knows?
processed. They might have played it. Maybe they had to play it down an octave, and they processed it up an octave.
It's possible. I mean, the London Symphony players could get up there. I mean, they're pretty distinct with their trumpet playing.
Well,
so.
and again, I went to a school of music, and I want to brag a little bit. I have some friends that went there who are professional musicians. Like, they play trumpet on video game and film score soundtracks in Norman, Oklahoma, and Florida and stuff like that. But, like, I listened to those guys for 4 years. They can't do that. But I also think it's okay because it's another world instrument playing. So I don't really care. Yeah. I just thought it was funny. Anyway, that's his favorite. Yes. He loves that piece of music. Then we get into it. But he loves.
Wow. Just don't tell him that that's a strange variation of the Emperor's theme.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Da na 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 na. Da, na, 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 na. Then play the Emperor's theme.
That's so cool.
The Phantom
cool.
Menace.
Yeah, the part he loves is the horn rip.
Laughing. Oh, really?
The horn rip. He loves that. He loves the horn rip. And then my daughter's favorite is every time when she's in the car, if she has control of the radio, which we kind of go back and forth on who gets to pick. This is what she wants to hear. I'm just going to give you a few seconds. I'll get into the theme. So those of you who are playing home, that's Doctor Strange. That's Michael Giacchino's Doctor Strange.
Yep.
that's her favorite. I mean, my 5-year-old.
That's a
My
great piece.
5-year-old wants to listen to Doctor Strange, and she always calls him Doctor Stranges. Can we listen to Doctor Stranges? Sure, no problem.
Well, it was like my son wanting to watch Phantom Menace. He'd always call it "Let's watch Double
Sure.
Lightsabers." He didn't know
That's
the name
fair.
of the movie.
That's really fair. So, going back to A New Hope. Again, this is what happens. You've been on the show before. You know how my brain is weird.
Sure.
I got you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I expect.
So for me, it's the TIE fighter attack. I think for me, that's what it is. What would it be for you?
Yeah, with Star Wars, it could easily be the binary sunset. But there's a real transition moment, and it has to do with Luke. It's the biggest transition moment in the film, and even with the score, and it's the burning homestead.
Oh, yeah.
And I absolutely love the drama that Williams is pouring out onto this scene. And it is, I think, it's the turning point for Luke, where he stops being a whiny, snotty kid and has to grow up. And we're hearing this incredible rendition of the Force theme. But what's also happening is you're hearing in counterpoint the Dies Irae. And it just feels like, and Luke is standing, and we're seeing him from behind with the wind blowing through his clothes, and we see all the smoke. And I feel that I don't think necessarily the Dies Irae at that moment is representing the death of his aunt and uncle. I just feel that it adds an extra bit of power and movement to Luke's transition from being that farm boy to eventually a Jedi. This is where everything changes for him, and Williams is just emphasizing that with those extra horn blasts. And I've always loved that piece. And unfortunately, you're talking about needle drops. This piece was needle dropped into The Force Awakens when Rey grabs the lightsaber out of the snow from Kylo Ren, and it's needle dropped in there, and it's so unbelievably distracting because Williams wrote his own piece of music for that moment, and I just felt that didn't really work. But anyway, Burning Homestead is one of the most emotionally powerful moments, I think, for me in the entire Star Wars saga.
Is that a cue that's specifically called that? So
yes. On your album, I wouldn't. Oh, what would it
That's
be
what I was
called?
looking for. I was hoping to play a little bit of it here, but I don't.
I mean, I'm trying to. I wouldn't know what that track is called on the LP.
The only thing I can think of would be the Imperial Attack, but I would think that'd be the beginning.
No, it was. I mean, I think I might have the original. I'm looking through the '93 booklet right now, and whether
it's not Little People Work, is it?
Is there anything called Return Home?
Yes.
So it's at the end of that, probably.
All right. So we'll play.
And that transitions into the Death Star motif where they go and interrogate Princess Leia.
Here it is.
Really cool transition.
Yeah.
This is it.
And then TIE fighters go screaming by. Yeah. It is really good. And it's so funny. I'm glad that you pointed out the Dies Irae because, that's a very famous piece of music. And I've even played it. And I'm glad I wasn't the only one that thought that that's what that was. So that's good to kind of get a little bit of confirmation bias a little bit there. Yeah, for me, I'm going just to play just a few seconds of it here, but it's just that TIE fighter attack. It's just really high energy, and that it's all in the high brass there. It's just great. It just gets me so excited. So there you go. That's
I mean, and the thing about it, and I mentioned, I think earlier on in the program, it just stands on its own as just a piece of music that you can enjoy, and you get a start, a middle, and an end. It just feels complete. It plays through the scenes, but it's hitting specific sync points as well, and that's what masterful composers do. And you're right; it's an incredible just an incredible set piece. I love Williams's set pieces, and he has them all over Star Wars, and that's just
one of them.
one of the best.
All right. Well, let's jump ahead now to, unless there's any other particular cues you want to mention in either A New Hope or, well, we'll just stay here for A New Hope.
Well, I mean, one thing I want to mention, and this is something that I think plagues some of the later Star Wars, is that they're just wallpapered with music. And I'm not saying that Star Wars does not have a lot of music, but what I found very interesting, and I noticed this, I mean, a few years back, but as you watch the final battle, I mean, it starts off with a whole bunch of great action music and set up as they're going into the trenches. But then there's a point where the music just stops and doesn't play for about 5 minutes. There's still action going on, but the music doesn't return until Biggs dies. And then we get John Williams is back, where I think in a film today, all of that would have been scored. Every single moment. And I just love the fact that there's a section in the middle of that final battle where all we're seeing is just the Viz with the great sound effects by Ben Burt, and it's not as urgent until Williams is brought back after Biggs's death. So I found that quite interesting, and it's rare in big adventure films to do something like that.
Yeah,
like
it would be
just
weird
silence.
to see Jack Sparrow on the bridge of the Black Pearl sword fighting with no music.
Right.
That would be
right.
a shock, but that's interesting. Again, I think that's another risk. And it's so weird. You said that, and I had to think back in my brain, and I'm reliving the scene going, yeah, you're right. There's a scene where Luke is just like lighting up the Death Star with his laser blasts, and there's no music. And then, he pulls up and he says, are you all right? He goes, yeah, I got a little cooked back there. There is no music there. You say, oh my gosh. I never thought of it. It's just one of those things. All right. Interesting. Okay. I'm trying to think. I'm just going through here. The only thing else I can think of is, Leia's theme, which is very beautiful, very melodic, and we get it. It feels like all the time, right? I mean, don't we even get a hint of it? Don't we in Revenge of the Sith? Don't we get a hint of it towards the end?
It's in Revenge of the Sith. Yeah, we see her as a baby.
Get a little bit of it there.
She's her theme is played.
I blew my son's mind away, by the way, when her music was playing, and I said, "That's Leia's theme." He goes, "Oh, okay," because he's heard it before. So then we've also started watching Harry Potter. We've watched the first 2 movies. He's read the first 3 books. And so when the theme comes in, I said, "Do you know what that theme is called?" He goes, "That's Harry Potter's theme." I said, "No, it's Hedwig's theme." He goes, "He wrote the theme after the owl?" I said, "Yes." And like that, just my son is just having a hard time with that. Like I could hear the gears grinding in his head, going, "Why would he write the music after the owl?"
Yeah, it's true. And Harry has his own theme, which then changes in the 3rd movie.
Yeah. Well, the 3rd movie is my favorite movie, and it's also my favorite. Of the John Williams 3, because he only did the 3, but it's so good. The Buckbeak, the Buckbeak flight is
music,
brilliant, and I love the jazz bit when they're on the bus.
The
night bus scene is so amazing, and Williams is so undercredited for his jazz. Again, Tintin is just 100% filled with jazz. If you hate jazz, listen to that score. You might change your mind a little bit.
That or Catch Me If You Can. A lot of jazz in that, or The Terminal. But I mean, that's his roots. That's where he started. He was a jazz musician, and then he was a jazz. I mean, he has some great jazz albums, and he wrote some great jazz scores back in the '60s as well. I mean, and that's why his music is so dynamic as well. A lot of the music is written in a jazz idiom. The interesting orchestrations and time signatures and things of that he incorporates. It's very jazz oriented. It's tough to pick out, but I mean, you can just hear it. Like even in the action music, it almost has kind of like this jazzy movement to it, and it's quite unique to Williams.
So on to Return of the Jedi. At some point, we're going to have to wrap up here. So I have to say, last week we covered Return of the Jedi for the podcast and for the kind of the main episode, and of course I bitched as I did about the changing of the song in Jabba's palace to that new abomination. I don't know if Williams had anything to do with it. I hope not, because it's kind of terrible.
It is terrible,
and I'm not even comparing it to the original, because I let my 9-year-old have a judgment. I let him listen to the Disney Plus version first, and then showed him this is what the other version was, and he was like, "Oh, I like that better." It's like, well, yeah, because it's more fun. It's not some dude yelling.
Right. It feels like a piece of source music, something that you would play like in this loungy, sleazy, underground of Tatooine. And this Jedi Rocks piece is an abomination.
It's really bad. I mean, this is what it is. Like if you yeah, it's just this kind of chill jazz lounge kind of thing, and I don't know why they changed it, unless because they added the scene with the Twi'lek getting eaten by the Rancor, so it would have thrown the timing off a little bit. But I don't know why they even added that. I don't know why they changed any of that. I kind of understand the changing at the end. I get that justification. I don't understand what the purpose of that change was at all.
Just a way to sell it, I guess.
Get it.
I mean, there weren't too many changes.
Not
in Jedi,
really.
Besides that and the ending. And they made subsequent changes later on, like Vader yelling no.
Yeah.
When he's throwing the Emperor down the shaft, which is just the dumbest thing. But I don't think there's too many changes. The Sarlacc pit changes. It has a beak now, but I mean, again, besides that, the pacing of the movie stays relatively the same, with the exception of that stupid Jedi Rocks piece.
Yeah. Yeah. I was.
It's just calling attention to itself when you didn't need to, because the whole original sequence is just this little 20-second bit, and then it was over. But George Lucas really didn't like the puppets and the animatronics, and really Slice Noodles, is that her name? You can see some of the wires as she's dancing around, and she's not really moving the way that he wanted her to move. So that's why he wanted to introduce a new character and have her be more animated. I think that's the justification for him redoing that scene. And it just doesn't work.
Just
really
so
bad.
for you not sure what he's referring to when he says the no. That's it.
Yeah.
I captured that from last week.
I mean, it sucked in Revenge of the Sith, but it sucks in Return of the Jedi.
That's really dumb. I don't know. It is unnecessary.
It's unnecessary.
All right. So. Okay. Back to because we did highlight some of the changes, and I don't want this episode to be that, and I certainly didn't mean for the 3 episodes to be us bitching about the changes. They did more in A New Hope than they did the other 2, which I find interesting. I don't know why. Maybe because he didn't have the budget that he had for the other 2 with A New Hope that he wanted to add. But there's some of the changes I don't really care about. It doesn't really matter that they've CGI'd some extra stormtroopers looking for the droids. It doesn't really matter that they CGI'd a bunch of dumb animals in Mos Eisley. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they added, when Obi-Wan cuts the arm off of that dude, that you hear him screaming longer in this version. And I said they probably did that to let, they want my 9-year-old to think that guy's still alive, that Obi-Wan didn't just murder this guy in a bar. That's what. Yeah, maybe. That's why they.
But there's just so many little things that he changed that were. I mean, it's he's just noodling around, and some of them you won't even recognize until I watched a YouTube video earlier because I wanted to find points in the Empire Special Edition where it affected the music, and these are changes that I like, because going back to the point of John Williams crafting versions of the Imperial March that are not the same every time you hear it. In the 1980 version, there are 3 transitions that come out of Dagobah into a shot of the fleet, the Imperial fleet. And for some reason, in the 80 version, they would cut to a portion of the concert suite of the Imperial March and not hear John Williams' original transitioning cue. But when they did the special edition, they actually changed that. They took those 3 pieces out and they laid over top what John Williams had originally
that's interesting.
wrote for those. So, I mean, there are some good things about the special editions. That's the minor little thing that I like because it has to do with the music. But then there's another portion, and you're talking about the little changes that might not mean anything. And I mean, for film score fans, we really pay attention to the little things. And so the insertion of the snow monster in the cave basically messes around with Williams's music, and there's certain sync points and timings that Williams is hitting with his music, and it seems minor, but essentially when I used to watch Empire Strikes Back, I always felt that when Luke is hanging upside down in the cave and he's reaching out for the lightsaber and it sort of starts jiggling a bit, that at that point John Williams is adding these brass blasts every time it moves. So there's like these little I think it's the brass or little jiggles in the string. So every time it moves, right, he adds this little accent that I always felt that John Williams was helping Luke lift that saber out of the snow and into his hands. But by adding the snow monster, it switches that cue, and that no longer makes any sense. It's a little nitpick that people like me pick up, but it just, the impact of the music, and it's happened in any type of change that was made to the special editions, the music gets butchered and its original intent isn't there anymore. But that's a little thing that I notice.
Dude, no, you're totally, you're speaking my language, because again, the audio guy here, I notice a lot of those little things too. Little things. Usually not always musically. Sometimes it's just other little dumb things I notice. For example, like in Jedi, when Han Solo says Boba Fett, right? They just take the line and they just literally repeat it. They just take the audio clip and then just stick it right back in the movie.
Mm.
I mean, it's the exact same thing, right? It's the exact same audio file,
Yeah.
or piece of tape. So, like, I know those little things, but that's from the original. Yeah. That's been forever, right? That wasn't a change. Let's just go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room. The Yub Yub, right? They changed the ending piece of music, and I never understood why until someone told me about 5 years ago, and I have no idea if this is true. So here you are, the expert, to tell me if my friend is up a creek. And he told me the reason why they did that was because the whatever it's called. It's not. I always call it Yub Nub, whatever it's called. Whatever. Ewok celebration and finale. It's.
Yeah, but people do call it Yub Nub. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that, right? It's the Ewoks playing on the heads of dead stormtroopers. I like to joke that there's actually heads still inside those helmets. Remember, these Ewoks were about to eat our heroes. Like, these are savages. Like
true.
They were gonna. These are not just cuddly teddy bears. And again, I let my 9-year-old be the judge. I played both pieces, the Disney Plus version and then the original. And he liked the kind of fun, cartoony ending of the original. And he also asked me the questions. And again, this is a boy who has seen episodes 1 and 2. He's not seen 3 yet because 3 is a little, for a 9-year-old, I thought it was a little too rough yet. It's a little intense. But he asked the questions. He says, why are they celebrating on Naboo and Coruscant and Kashyyyk? I'm like, well, it's because they're celebrating that the Emperor's dead and that they're free. He says, oh, okay. And then, but I said, like, which music do you like better? And he was like, well, that one's more fun. And then, of course, they put Anakin. They put Hayden Christensen in ghost form, and then that's when I say that's where when Luke should stop. You know, hey, hold on, guys, stop. I don't know who that is. Because that's not the man I just burned. Yep. Right? That's somebody else. Stop looking at me like that.
Somebody else.
Stop that weird look. So, again, if you listened last week, I apologize. I know I made the same joke last week, but. And I don't want to get into it. You heard it. Go listen to last week. I get a huge soapbox on it. It's a thing. But do you know why? Like, is there a logical reason why? And also, that the new piece of music, was that written by John Williams? Okay.
Yes. So for the special editions, they wanted to include this new ending, which included celebrations from all around the galaxy. And it was also a way for him to start showing the expanded universe because 2 years later, he's releasing The Phantom Menace. So since it's a longer sequence, John Williams was tasked to write a new ending piece, which was called Victory Celebration. So it's a brand new theme. It still has the same sort of rhythm and pace that the original Ewok Celebration had, but it's on a grander scale. And so that was the whole point of that. He just had to write new music for this brand new sequence. And what they felt was that the Yub Nub stuff was it kind of stays within that group of rebels who are on Endor, which I actually like. I mean, honestly, I think the Death Star exploding and the Emperor dying, I mean, that doesn't mean it's the end of the Empire. I mean, there must be more spaceships and things like that all around the universe. I mean, so, I mean, I think the celebration for me should have stayed with Luke and Han and Leia, and that's where the little Ewok piece seems just a little bit more personal. So yeah, the whole point of Victory Celebration, which is special edition on, is just to cover all the new CGI.
Okay. I figured that's what it was. I just, like to hear it from somebody smarter than me.
Yeah.
And I don't hate it. I don't, again, it's what I grew up. So, I mean, if my son watches Return of the Jedi 10 times, and this is the version that he hears, this will be the normal for him. And then when I play him I play Ewok Celebration, it will sound different to him. It'll sound weird, and he'll say, "I don't understand why they're doing that." And then he'll say, "Who was that old man?" Because I did show him that. I showed him the original scene, and when the guy came up, I said, "Who is that?" He says, "Well, that's Anakin, obviously." And I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "But I wouldn't have known that other than he's the only other person it could be." And I said, "Exactly." And my son just kind of looks at me and I said, "This is where I think George Lucas thinks we're dumb." And he says, and my son's like, "Wait a minute, whoa. Like I've hurt his friend's feelings, right?" And he's like, "Well, I think that's unfair." And I said, "No." I said, "I honestly think that because we have to put Hayden Christensen in there, otherwise you won't know who Anakin Skywalker is if we leave the other guy. I honestly think it's because George Lucas thinks that we're dumb as fans." And then I have another soapbox about how directors think we're stupid, and again,
and they do. Yes, producers and directors definitely do think that we're stupid. But we've had this, like, it was from 83 till 97. That was the norm. We knew what it was, and it was. I mean, it's the redemption of Anakin. I mean, and now I think the whole point of having young Anakin was that, that's when he was a Jedi, and when he turned to the dark side. I mean, you don't come back as who you were when you were part of the dark side. But Vader, Anakin was redeemed at the end of Jedi, so he can come back as an older version of himself. But it made sense. I mean, I knew it. I was 7 or 8 when I saw Jedi. I knew who the hell it was. So just change
Yeah.
for change's sake. It's a cliche. It's ridiculous for Star Wars. It just is. They're just going to keep on changing this thing until it's unrecognizable.
It is weird. It's a weird moment because then the argument's like, well, then why isn't it like Ewan McGregor? But anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But it's fine. It's again, my son will watch it and he'll enjoy it. And Star Wars is for kids anyway. So ultimately, we haven't answered the question I posed 25 minutes ago before I went down the tangent, the soapbox I said I didn't want to get on. So going back and re-listening to this, so there was something that I did not realize until today. And again, you can roll your eyes for those who are listening because of Erik and his show, and go, "How could you not know this and call yourself an audiophile?" But I love in this movie, Return of the Jedi. I love that we have the third act, which is essentially the last half of the movie, but it's the third act of the movie, is the battle. But it's 3 locations. We're on Endor, space battle, and in the Death Star. We have 3 different types of conflicts happening. And therefore, we have to have 3 different types of music happening. And while listening to the soundtrack this time, I did not realize that the music that he wrote for the scenes on the Death Star, that's its own thing. The battle between Vader and Luke and the Emperor, that's all one track. And then the space battle is a track, and then the Endor is a track. And that when we go to different places, we get the music for that spot. And I, for whatever reason, it just, in my brain as I was always watching it growing up, I just assumed that when he writes the music for how the movie is edited, right? Here's the final edited version. Now he writes the thing. So here's this part, and then we stop, and then we get to this new part, and then we stop, and then we get to this new part, and then we go back. Mm-hmm. But listening to it on the track form, on the CD, my brain has to skip forward 7 minutes because this is the part where the Emperor is goading Luke. Oh, now we got to the part where he and Vader are squaring off. But there's like 10 minutes between that, and then here's the part where the Emperor says, young Skywalker, you will die. And then he starts, hitting him up with the Force lightning. And I'm like, well, that's another 10 minutes that's gone by. And then Vader picks him up and chucks him like a Frisbee. And then, that's another few minutes past. So I never knew that. I never thought about it, that he wrote them as one track for those moments. And so call me dumb, but I really enjoyed kind of figuring that out.
Yeah, I mean, writing film music is an interesting. It's an interesting way they create it. It is also interesting the way they perform it. I mean, you might have an 8-minute sequence, 8-minute action cue, and you might have only written a 2-minute piece here, 2-minute piece there, 2-minute piece here, 2-minute piece there. It's all going to play in 8 minutes, but you've recorded 4 separate sections so that you're not absolutely destroying your orchestra in one 8-minute cue and bashing those together for a single 8-minute cue. All the transitions are there and they're done on purpose. And John Williams does that all the time. I think what is interesting with Jedi and even in the Phantom Menace is juggling 3 different scenes and making transitional music to go from, let's say, Endor to the space battle. And so you'll hear 4 or 5 minutes of the forest battle. And once you get into a transition sequence, you're right, the music changes and it has to match the excitement that you're seeing on screen from a space battle. And so there's one great transitional cue where it just it comes out of the Ewok music, which is all very kind of tribal and rhythmic and wild. And then once you get into the space battle with the explosions, he just rips at you with these rapid fire trumpets as you see the Falcon flying around. And he did that in Empire Strikes Back as well. And it just signifies that you are now in the space battle. And that is always, I always love the way that composers are able to transition from one set piece to another. And Williams had to do that. I mean, you look at some of the track times of Return of the Jedi and how much continuous music there is. I mean, you're going from the Endor battle to space to, you're right, to Luke and Vader. And there's a whole wide range of different tones and styles and sounds that you have to match. But most of the time, unless you're like James Horner was very famous for writing massive like cues, sometimes lasting 16, 17 minutes long, and he performed that from note one to the last note in one recording. And where, John Williams will take, a 10-minute sequence, and as I said, we'll chop it up, but then bash them all together. And so, but he still has to somehow flow. His music has to flow with the dramatic, with the storytelling, the arc. And so once you get to the point where you're just, if it doesn't seem like sometimes some of the music can seem out of place. And this is the issue that's with the Phantom Menace, because there's so many crazy edits and so many pieces of music that isn't actually written for that scene. And that's a whole other thing. If you ever want to talk about the prequel trilogy, you want to hear me get on a soapbox, I can do that. And it doesn't really happen here in the original trilogy because, these films were locked pretty much when Williams got the music. So, but yeah, film scoring is such an interesting process, and it's an incredible skill. It's an incredible gift, and these guys they're writing music right down to the last 1/100th of a second. I mean, you just see the cue sheets that they get, and for Empire, they would watch the movie. And Williams would know, like at 1 minute, 17 seconds and 2 milliseconds, that this is where the cut is, or that's where this is happening. And he's able to mathematically figure out where his music has to go and what has to be written from this point to that point. So he knows he has 4 seconds to fill. So he'll write 4 seconds of music to get to that point. And it's all written on paper. It's marvelous to see that. If you ever get a chance, there's a great documentary on The Empire Strikes Back that was filmed at the time that they were making The Empire Strikes Back, and there's a whole bunch of great Williams behind the scenes footage, and he's writing the Minot Cave music. And you could see him actually writing it and coming up with it on the piano. He's talking to his music editor, and you can see them recording that same cue then on the scoring stage. I love it. I love I love the whole process of film scoring. It's just great to see it go from an idea in his head to the piano to the orchestra. It's fantastic.
So to finally answer the question, I have two kind of favorite moments when I went back and re-listened to it today. One, I love the forest battle. I think the forest battle as a standalone piece of music is probably my favorite of this movie. I just love the energy, notwithstanding when Chewie does the Tarzan roar. But there's just something really fun about this. And the time signature just changes constantly, and it's like the music is symbolic of the battle, because it's a battle. It's crazy. There's all kinds of stuff. It's really just really fun and interesting. And there's also a section that has there's a section that has like bells, like sleigh bells. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, if you didn't know any better, this would sound like a Christmas movie, which is kind of funny. But the other part that I loved that I never noticed, and maybe because it didn't make a lot of the movie, I don't know, I don't remember hearing it, is the tuba solo from Jabba, for Jabba's theme. And I heard this, and I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, so my brain is spinning, right? Because I'm listening to it going, is that a tuba or is that a euphonium? So I'm listening to it really carefully. Again, this is a moment where I stopped working. I just sat down. I was listening with my headphones on. And then I had to go find it. I had to go onto YouTube and Google, Jabba's Palace, John Williams, tuba. And it is a tuba solo. And there's a great video of the guy playing the tuba. But it's also, he's not playing a full tuba. He's playing what we call a quarter tuba. So it's like a tuba light, like whatever the difference between a euphonium and a tuba is, This is that instrument. So it's some of them will have a smaller mouthpiece. It's the same shank that goes into the pipe, that large bore, but the mouthpiece can be a little bit smaller so that you can get a little bit of that better tonguing. Because there's a lot of really intricate, notes and tonguing happening on that Jabba piece. But the reason why it made me realize, because when I physically saw the tuba, I'm like, oh, that's a smaller tuba. But he can't really hit a lot of low notes. It's all kind of in the medium register. Part of me is sitting there thinking he should have just written it for euphonium, but you didn't put euphonium in orchestras very often. I know Zimmer did a couple times, but for the most part you don't. And I know Holtz did, obviously, very famously. But those are the two that I really cued in on, and not just because I really wanted to see if I can get my hands on the sheet music for that tuba solo and try to play it myself.
Oh man, I mean, he hits all the ranges from that instrument, right? There's some absolutely ridiculously high notes that I don't know how the guy managed to hit, but you're right. There's this low rumble of the tuba just right near the end, right? He does this little, I think there's a little solo piece, or an improvised portion right near the end, and he just starts hitting these rumbly low notes. So I mean, he's gone from like the super high, the maximum high that you can get to for a tuba, and I'm sure the guy's mouth was bleeding by the time he was done, all the way to this just guttural, low, bassy, rumble of the instrument, and it's fantastic. And what's crazy though is that concert piece is not even on the 83 soundtrack. You can't find it. And by the way, I think they recorded the concert suite for the Return of the Jedi sessions, but that version of the concert theme has never been released. So we don't have the original recording of the Jabba concert suite as recorded during the Jedi sessions. It's never been released on any other album, and the only way you can get it is on re-recordings. So yeah. But it's a great theme. I think it's cliche, but it fits. And it has this Middle Eastern feel to it as well, and I really like that. The percussion that is written, some of those string lines as well seem very Middle Eastern to me.
Yeah, here's just a little taste of it. So, I mean, it's just this fun little thing. Let's see if I can get towards the end here. Some of the pedal tones he's hitting. Pedal tone is the word you're looking for. That low stuff.
Okay.
There you go. There's kind of some of the end there.
Great stuff.
Yeah, those are some of those low. If I had perfect pitch, I could tell you what the note was. If our old co-host Cornelius was on the show, he could tell you what it is. My dad could tell you what it is. He has that. But yeah, it's just fun. It's just a lot of fun, and it makes you kind of remember that John Williams loves all of the brass. And one of my favorite little fun pieces that he did the March 1942. He did the movie for 1942, and thank you, 41. Sorry, because there is a 1942. He did the I got to march in college a John Williams piece of music. Everyone that was in a marching band probably marched some kind of John Williams suite. But we opened with 1941. Our middle section was the Hedwig's theme from Harry Potter, and then we closed with a Cadillac in the Sky from Empire of the Sun, which transitioned into Land Race from Far and Away, and it was so amazing to go from that da 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 da. It builds, and then it just goes into da da dum da 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 dum da da dum for the Land Race, and it's just such energy. And it's I 5 years of marching band. I remember 2 shows: the 9/11 show and the John Williams show. I don't remember any of the other ones. So that's fine. What was yours? Do you have one for Return?
Yeah, I mean, there's one partial section, and I mentioned it. It was the victory fanfare that it plays at the end of the sail barge battle, and again, it's one of those one-off melodies that you never hear again. I think and I could be wrong. I'm not a musicologist, but I think there is a variation of that theme when the Death Star blows
Yeah.
up. There's another very fanfaric victory piece at the end there. But this melody is something that any other composer would gladly use as the main theme for their film. And here John Williams is, just one off. I'm just going to play this at the end as a way, it's not any of the recognizable themes. It's just something brand new. And I think it's absolutely glorious. But the other cue, and I think the reason I like it so much, and again, earlier on in the program, I mentioned that I used to listen to those 24-page read-along books. And the Return of the Jedi book, for all the action sequences, while the narrator was reading, they would play the Into the Trap cue. And it's this great piece of, I guess, prelude music to the Death Star battle, as all the spaceships are flying by the medical frigate and just calling in their call signs, and just at the last second, Lando realizes that the shield is still up, and they dart away from the invisible shield, and then they finally get into the battle. What I always thought was really cool about this cue is that for that whole setup, John Williams is utilizing a variation of Darth Vader's or the Imperial March's B theme. So not that big, statement that we hear of Vader's theme. It's that secondary theme, that lighter kind of fluttery flute music that you hear. And so Williams utilizes that. He utilizes it in the opening titles as well, but it's during the Into the Trap sequence that we finally get to hear him play around with that portion of the Imperial March for this great kind of upbeat, getting ready for battle piece of music.
Yeah, the melody is in the cellos, which is just great. Here it is. You get the little bit of the theme. And this is where Lando is realizing something ain't right. Yeah, no, it's great. It's a good piece. It's so good. It's so good. And, of course,
it gets chopped up a bit in the movie. So I think in the deleted scenes, you can see there's other pilots that are calling out their call numbers. And so the piece, unfortunately, gets a little, nipped and tucked. But besides that,
and that was the scene for, what was it called again? It's called
Into the Trap.
Oh, I didn't have my volume up. Gosh dang it, I didn't have it queued up. Failed. Okay, there we go.
Trap, yes.
Gosh dang it. Had the joke pulled
Classic.
up, and I just didn't execute. Okay, all right. Well, on that note, I think that's a good place to end. Me failing to execute a joke. If you've listened to this show long enough, you know that I do that all the time. And here's the annoying thing. I actually had it in my main queue. So I now have a list of about, 60 songs that I keep at the handy, so that if I need to have, at any point, I can just click on, so I can hear Steve Rogers say that that's gross, right? So right above the water boy noise, where he gets hit in the head, I now have.
Wow.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah. Oh, I got a bunch
Nice.
of these, man. It's insane. I have a lot of fun with my soundboard. Though we've made the joke many times that I could almost have a podcast with how many sound clips I have. I could just, just back and forth with just, well, okay. I don't have a reason, but sure. Yeah, exactly. Last one I'm going to play is this one. That's a noise that Kevin Costner made in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. All right. Yeah, remember when he meets the priest? He goes up and the priest goes, "Oh, the man, there was a boy I knew, the man stands before me, whatever." And then that's when he cuts Alan Rickman on the side of the face, but he gooses him.
Yeah.
That's the noise that Kevin Costner makes.
Really?
I've just ruined your night.
That is so odd.
Yep.
That's so weird.
That's Kevin Costner. Oh my gosh. Okay. There you go. All right. Eric, this has been a blast. I had no idea we were going to fill 2 hours of this show, but good gracious, here we are. I was honestly losing sleep last night if we were going to make it an hour. So, yeah, because
really?
it's we're talking about one that's it's music, so it's hard to really express your emotions about music without playing some of it, which I was a little apprehensive, but I did it, and if I get whatever. But also, again, it's Star Wars, right? Like I put out 3 episodes on the Star Wars, and I already got a little bit of pushback on Twitter. It's like it's Star Wars, right? It's the most like covered thing on the planet besides politics, So,
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to talk about I think it's honestly tough to talk about Star Wars and not talk about music. You have to. It's they're just it's all one and the same. It all works together, and I think I mean, I could honestly go on for another 2 hours if we had to, and I could just talk forever about these series of films and scores. Because honestly, I mean, if you didn't think you can get to 2 hours or even to 1 hour, I mean, we didn't really get into a whole lot of the stuff that I could have got into. So there's so much more here that we could talk about. But I think that the stuff that we did talk about was actually quite interesting.
Because you were hinting some of those things that you had, a lot of the trivia, a lot of the rhyme and reason, and maybe one day we'll have that episode. Maybe we'll have a bonus part 2 of this. I don't know. But I also know that sometimes people just kind of want to hear how we feel about things, and I think that's accurate. Of course, I might get a message and say, "No, we wanted to hear the other stuff." And then, in which case, sorry.
Well, I mean, like I said, if you want to know how we are feeling about things, or especially myself, and you really want to hear, I mean, if you love rants, then bring me on for us talking about the prequel music, and it will get.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Ugly.
Here's a deal I'm going to make with you at 2 hours and 5 minutes of the podcast. Is that we have already done our review of the original of the episodes 1, 2, and 3. But it does sound like a cool thing to revisit maybe next May when we get around to May the 4th again. And I think I teased last week that I'm going to force the guys to watch the 2 Ewok movies. Because those are on Disney Plus. So that sounds like a lot of fun to do to them, to Andrew and Sam.
Fun.
See, the thing is that I watched them as a kid, so to me, I loved them as a kid. I haven't watched them. I'm about to turn 40. I haven't watched them in 30 years. So I have no idea if they hold up. They probably don't. But 9-year-old me loved the hell out of those things. So,
okay.
So Eric, please tell people that listen to my show how they can find more of you, because you've done like a big deep dive on Star Wars on your show, and I would really suggest people go listen to that.
Yeah, it's funny. I've done a bunch of Star Wars shows. A lot of it's just on the music itself. So if you want to find like different recordings of Star Wars music and whatnot, I've gone into some detail there. But I mean, this is really the first time that I've gone into a deep dive on Star Wars anywhere.
Oh.
So most of the time I'm called in to do Star Trek, which is bizarre because I'm not really a Trekkie. I like Star Trek, but I mean, it's like I seem to be, someone who could talk about Star Trek quite a lot. And Indiana Jones. I could talk about Indiana Jones all night. But if you want to hear more of my stuff, then cinematicsound.net is where you want to go. And if you want to talk to me, I'm on Twitter, SynSound Radio, or on Facebook at Cinematic Sound. And those are places you can find me and listen to the show. And I hope you find something that you like.
Again, the Waterworld episode is what hooked me. So go.
Yeah, those Soundtrack Alley episodes are becoming my favorites. And there's a lot of great shows coming. Like we're doing. Well, I wasn't on Stargate, but Stargate's coming up. And But yeah, if anybody out there wants to hear us talk about a particular movie and score, then we'd love to hear from you, because we'll take ideas from anybody. But we've done Crystal Skull, Batman Returns, Jurassic Park, Aliens, and we're doing Alien 3 coming up. So those are fun. I really love just diving into to a film score and talking
Absolutely.
about it forever.
My eternal thanks to you, Eric, for doing this. This was a lot of fun. I'm so glad that you agreed that I basically browbeat you into doing this. I'm teasing, of course. I bribed him with I don't know what I could say here. What joke would work? Insert generic Canadian stereotype thing. That's what I bribed you with. There you go.
Oh wow. I wouldn't know. What I don't even know what the Canadian.
Well, for us,
version of that
I would
is.
just, dumb American would say, I either I bribed you with the Tim Hortons gift card, or just a jug of maple syrup, or hockey tickets or something. I don't know. So all that is to say, we are Cheap Seat Reviews. Cheapseatreviews.libsyn.com is our website. There you can find links to all of our social media. And the past 372 episodes, including the last 3 that we just did on Star Wars. I am so glad that we had a listener request us to do the Star Wars. I was nervous about them, but they've been a lot of fun. And there's been a lot of really good conversations, specific with Randy from Soundtrack Alley, and last week when we had Lady Wan on from Screen Run. On behalf of Eric, this is Shawn saying thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week for what will be a really fun topic. Next week we start our not Christmas movie theme month. Yeah, very fun stuff. See you next week.
This is Cheap Seat Reviews.